One will convene the Mendocino Council of Governments to order, and would someone like to conduct the roll?
Director Jim Brown.
I'm here.
Director Greta Connie.
I'm here.
Director Scott Ignacio.
Here.
Director Tess Alvin Smith.
Here.
Director John Haschak.
Here.
Director Rex Jackman.
You bet.
And Chair Jurdy.
Yes, here. Okay, so we are convening as the Regional Transportation Planning Agency, and immediately recessing and reconvening as the Policy Advisory Committee. The next thing on our agenda is public expression. We have public comment on non-agenda items. Members of the public can comment on items not on the agenda, or when we get to those items, we can comment on specific agenda items. Do we have any members of the public who wish to comment on non-agenda items?
And we have not received any additional non-agenda item comments on through email or through the website either.
Okay, all right. Well, then that takes us right into the presentation of the Gualala Downtown Streetscape Enhancement Project. This is information and discussion.
Yes, so this will be a joint effort between myself and Caltrans. So let me get the presentation going here. All right. So this is just, as you mentioned, not an action item, an informational and discussion item for board members to receive information on the most recent project alternative that was developed by Caltrans and the results of recent public engagement on the project. Let's see, so board feedback is important at this time and ongoing because of the sort of unique roles in the project that MCOG has. Although it is a Caltrans implemented project, because all the funding at this point comes from MCOG, the decision on which alternative ultimately moves forward lies with MCOG. Now, we'll be talking about funding today, and so depending on sources of future funding, there could be some changes to project roles, but at this point in time, that is how things are. So as I mentioned, we've got some Caltrans staff with us today. So Frank Demling, the project manager, Elias Karam is here to talk about the alternatives, and Liza Walker, the senior environmental planner, is also joining us, and they'll all be available to answer questions. So we'll start with just a quick overview of the project, and then we'll talk about, or Elias will talk about the new project alternatives, and we'll go over the public survey results, talk about project funding, and then open things up for board questions and public comment as well. So first, the project purpose and need is to create a safe and comfortable facilities for pedestrians and bicycle travel and improve traffic flow, to reduce conflicts between motorized and non-motorized users, and to improve the visual character by incorporating landscape and hardscape features. This map shows the extent of the project. It's just under half a mile along Highway 1 through the downtown area of the Gualala community. And now, before I turn it over to Elias, I think we're actually going to switch who's sharing screen. But I did want to just go over a brief background of why we are at a point where we're discussing a new alternative. So this project was originally conceptualized through community planning efforts. Then Caltrans began work on the environmental review for the project in 2016. Following release of a draft environmental document and an extensive public outreach effort in 2019, there was a community meeting held at which there was broad support for alternative 3, which required a 64-foot right-of-way. So following that community meeting at the end of 2019, the Caltrans design team discovered that in order to implement that project, significant retaining walls would be needed on both sides of the highway, which would also require additional right-of-way. And because of that, they went back to the project, went back to the literal drawing board and look at additional alternatives for community review. So the new alternative 4, which is 4A and 4B, was presented to the community at a workshop, a virtual public meeting in January that was very well attended. And at the same time, a public survey was made available to get public feedback on that alternative and the project in general. So after we hear from Elias about the alternatives, then we will go into a review of the public survey results. So Elias, take it away.
Sorry, I was muted. Am I sharing the right screen? Can you see new project alternatives?
Yes,
7?
yes, looks good.
Perfect, thank you. So I'll briefly review the 2 new alternatives, and if you watch the public meeting, you have most of this information and it's still available. Okay, so MCOG and Caltrans collaborated to develop 2 new alternatives after receiving numerous comments, and Ophelia just talked about this. So the initial construction project for alternatives 4A and 4B are a hybrid of center turn lanes with limited on-street parking. Alternatives 4A and 4B have center lanes at the southern part of the town with parking on either side of SR1 at the north end. So alternatives 4A and 4B each have 2 sets of typical sections. One goes from Center Street to Church Street, and one goes from Church Street to Ocean Drive. Alternatives 4A and 4B have the same typical section between Center Street and Church Street, including 60-foot of right-of-way, center turn lanes, 2 11-foot wide travel lanes, 2 5-foot wide Class 2 bike lanes, 2 5-foot wide sidewalks, and 2 2-foot wide landscape strips. Between Church Street and Ocean Drive, alternatives 4A and 4B have parking on either side of SR1. There are a total of 5 plan sheets for each alternative. Alternative 4A and 4B share the same layout between Center Street and Church Street. The community has requested that the project development team analyze the possibility of including large vehicle parking in front of the community center. The design team is currently assessing feasibility. Driveway access mimics existing access points along SR1. The community has requested the project development team analyze if parking can be included in front of the surf market, consistent with the interim constrained plan alternative, which was previously recommended by GMAC. The team is currently assessing feasibility. The center turn lane ends at Church Street and shifts to allow parking on one side of SR1 between Church Street and Ocean Drive. Parking is shown more feasible on either side of SR1 with the letter P. At the north end of the project, crosswalks will be added across SR1 and Ocean Drive. Both alternatives can be restriped in the future to allow for a continuous center turn lane through downtown without major sidewalk and landscape reconstruction. The community has requested that we analyze if a left turn lane is feasible from southbound 1 to Ocean Drive. The team is currently assessing feasibility. And next we'll go back to Nafili for public survey, and then we'll have comments at the end, and I can pull this up again if we need to.
Thank you, Elias. let me. Okay. So as I mentioned, the public survey was made available concurrently with the virtual public meeting. The idea was for members of the community and stakeholders to participate in the public meeting or to watch the recording of the public meeting that was available on the project site, project website prior to taking the survey so that they could fully understand the alternatives before providing feedback. So Caltrans received 189 responses to the public survey, and of those responses, the vast majority were South Coast residents. We'll only be presenting highlights of the survey today in this presentation, but the full survey results, as well as a lot of other useful project information, are available on the Caltrans project website, which the web address is shown here. I also think if you just search Gualala Downtown Streetscape, the Caltrans project site is the first thing that comes up. And it's also linked on MCOG's site. So the survey asked about a number of different project components, including a continuous two-way left turn lane. So this is the one of the components that Elias discussed. So the continuous two-way left turn lane between Center Street and Church Street received 52% support, and 32% of respondents were opposed. The remaining respondents were neutral. A location for the turn lane between Church and Ocean Avenue was pretty evenly split between support and opposition, with 40% supporting and 41% in opposition, and the remaining neutral. And I will note that in some of there were a lot of individual responses in the survey, individual comments, and several of those indicated that some people didn't like the idea of a continuous turn lane in general, regardless of the location. And again, all those individual comments can be found in the full report of the survey results. So another component that was considered in the survey and has been a fairly significant point of disagreement in the community is on-street parking. So one of these survey questions asked people if parking were to be retained throughout in the project, where they would prefer, or should it be retained in the entire project or not at all. So you can see here that 23% of respondents preferred no parking at all. And then the remaining respondents wanted parking at some point in the project or at some location in the project, but the responses were mixed as to which location or all locations they liked. But the most supported location is between Church and Ocean on the east side of the highway. I think I skipped a slide. There we go. So another component or components that were considered in the survey were the support for the bicycle and pedestrian facilities, which are really kind of the key components of this project. So as you can see, bike paths, class 2 separated bike paths received fairly good support, with 53% of respondents in support of bike paths, and 21% neutral, and 26% of respondents in opposition to bike paths. Some of the individual responses that were received regarding bike paths indicated that they didn't feel they were necessary because Highway 1, both north and south of the project limits, does not have any bike paths, and so the bike paths through the downtown area wouldn't serve as much purpose. Then the other component is the pedestrian facilities, which you can see did receive strong support. 81% of respondents supported a continuous 5-foot wide sidewalk on both sides of the highway. 11% were opposed and 8% were neutral. Another type of sidewalk facility that was included in the survey was a meandering sidewalk, which would require a 12 feet of landscape. Sorry. Sorry about that. So a meandering sidewalk with 12 feet of landscaping. However, only 29% of respondents were in favor of that. And we also received some individual comments regarding that. So project enhancements beyond the basic components include landscaping and lighting. And landscaping is highly supported by the community. 70% of respondents are in support of landscaping. 15% of respondents were opposed to landscaping, and the remaining respondents were neutral. We did receive some individual comments suggesting that landscaping could be limited to just one side of the highway where right-of-way was particularly constrained, or where the additional room might be needed to allow for parking. Lighting had a little more mixed support. 41% of respondents were in support, 33% were in opposition, and 26% of respondents were neutral. So the type of lighting that the project proposes is bollard lighting, which would be a low-level lighting pointed down for pedestrian safety and benefit, but not necessarily creating a lot of light going out into the community. I should add one more thing while we're on the slide regarding landscaping. Caltrans has made it pretty clear throughout project development that they will not maintain the landscaping. So if landscaping were to be included, another agency would need to enter into an agreement to be responsible for maintenance of that landscape.
Nathuli,
Yes.
this is John Haschak. So why would people be opposed to the bollard lighting?
You know, I don't know offhand. It's not something that really was prominent in the individual comments that we received. I know that in general, I think especially in the Coastal Commission, sometimes there's concern about a lot of lighting and just the potential for light pollution that can come from those. So I don't know if that was the reasoning behind it, or people just didn't feel it was necessary. It wasn't something that there were a lot of additional information given on that. All right, so of course in the survey, respondents were asked about their support for the particular alternatives, and they were asked about alternative 4, which includes both alternative 4A and 4B, and that was the new alternative presented at the meeting and that you just heard about. So 61% of respondents were in support of that, 34% in opposition, and 5% neutral. Another alternative that people considered in the survey was the Gualala Town Plan alternative, which calls for an 80-foot right-of-way and no parking. So 21% of respondents were in support of that, 14% were neutral, and 65% were in opposition. And then finally, the option of a no-build alternative was included, which means just doing nothing, leaving Gualala as it is right now. And 21% of respondents were in support of that alternative, 75% were in opposition, and 4% were neutral. So now we'll go on to talk about project funding. So the current funding on the project is all, as I mentioned, it's all money that was awarded by the MCOG board as part of our Regional Transportation Improvement Program, which is the document that programs our regional shares of STIP funding. So currently, there's $340,000 for the environmental component, $575,000 for PS&E or the design component, and $900,000 for the right-of-way component. And then in addition to that, although it's not actually programmed, which means that, you know, as far as the state is concerned, it's not really on the project, but in our RTIP, we made a future commitment of up to $3,050,000 to cover non-ATP eligible portions of construction if needed. That was done in the last RTIP. And again, it's a flexible amount based on what was available in the fund estimate at that time. But because we didn't know the outcome of the ATP application at that time, it was left open. So now for the bad news. We did learn that our active transportation program grant application was not successful. It was a very, very competitive round of funding, and project, the overall size in terms of cost of individual projects was significantly higher than in the last round of funding. And so funding did not go as far as it has in previous funding cycles in terms of numbers of projects funded. So we had asked for a total of $7,224,000 through that application, which was primarily for construction, but also provided some supplemental funding for the project development components. So knowing that we will not have that grant funding in the immediate future, we thought it would be appropriate to talk today about future funding options. So the obvious option would be to reapply for active transportation program funding. There will be another call for projects in about 1 year from now. We did have a debrief with the California Transportation Commission staff about our application, and they encouraged us to reapply and provided some feedback to help strengthen things on the application. There are certain areas where the project, there's no way we can improve the project, such as the fact there's no school in Gualala, which impacts scoring. There's also not a history of accidents involving bicyclists and pedestrians, although we did receive feedback that the scorers liked how we demonstrated the safety concerns and the near misses through use of the street story application, and some other similar types of comments that would allow us to strengthen the project. So that's an option. And again, that would be about a year from now. It would also most likely require another round of public outreach, because that is sort of a key in applying for these funds is the public support and demonstration of public outreach. So if we were to follow that approach, that would probably be happening late summer or early fall of this year. So then another option for funding would be STIP programming. We'll be going through a STIP cycle, a normal STIP cycle in the fall of this, starting in the fall of this year, and adopting our RTIP in December for then adoption by the state as part of the STIP in March or April of next year. As I mentioned, we have the future funding commitment with a range of funding that could be programmed at that time. However, there are some constraints as far as that goes. STIP guidelines require that if STIP funds are programmed on any one component of a project, that project has to be fully funded in some way. It doesn't have to be fully funded with STIP, but it has to be fully funded. So we would not be able to program any of that money unless all the full construction component could be funded with available funding. The other potential problem with programming STIP funding in the fall is that because of the pandemic, the STIP fund estimate is likely to be pretty significantly impacted in this cycle. STIP funds come largely from the excise tax on fuel, and that has been one of the biggest impacts during the pandemic due to people not traveling for both recreation and just everyday driving. So we think that there will be limited funding available to us. We may not even be able to program that full amount that we had set aside last time. So some potential problems with STIP funding. Another option would be to encourage Caltrans to program complete streets funding. This is a fairly new funding source that's part of the SHOP, which is the State Highway Operation and Protection Program. There's a shift at the state level to take more of a complete streets approach in the SHOP. And so they are now including funding for bicycle and pedestrian enhancements in a project, particularly when there are other highway improvements going on simultaneously. So we don't have control over that, but it's something that we could encourage through Caltrans. And then another option is stimulus funding. So we have a small amount of stimulus funding that we'll be talking about later on the agenda, but we know that there is talk at the federal level of a much larger bill with significant funding for infrastructure. So that does have some potential for funding. The state could potentially add money to the active transportation grant program through that funding source, which would give us, when there's more money in the project, they can move further down a funding list. And so that would potentially give us another opportunity to be funded through the active transportation program as well. Of course, there are a lot of unknowns about how stimulus funding might come down to us. So that is just something we would have to watch and see what happens in the future. So that is the end of the presentation. So I'd like to open it up now for questions and comments from board members. And then I know we do have some members of the public on the meeting that I think would like to comment as well. And I'm going to stop sharing just in case Elias wants to bring his presentation back up if there are questions on the alternatives.
Okay, do we need board member questions or comments right now? Not seeing any. Do we have any members? Oh, Director Hashek.
I think Director Alden Smith was before me, so she can go ahead if you want, and then.
Oh, you're so polite. Yeah, I just wondering, I heard stimulus money, but I was wondering about the Rescue Act and whether any money could help with that. It sounds like, the cities themselves are getting money, the county's getting money, we're getting money. So I wonder how we could pool our funds and maybe make this happen.
So in the stimulus money that so far has come to, or it hasn't actually reached us yet, but will be coming through MCOG, is the CRISA, the HR 133 funding, the Coronavirus Response and Relief Stimulus Act. I'm sure that's wrong. HR 133 funding. So what we'll be discussing later. We do not know so far anything beyond that in terms of what would be coming through us regionally. So if the local agencies had money that would be available, that would be, up to them. But at this point, the HR 133 money is the only stimulus funding that is available through the regional agency.
Okay. Director Hashek?
Well, going off of that question, it certainly seems like if this infrastructure bill passes, we would hope that there'd be money for some of these projects that have been held up. But, you know, we toured Gualala Street project 2 years ago now, and we kind of had the same questions about what plan we were going to do, and there was certainly some contention about, you know, whether to have the street parking or not. And it just seems like we're kind of in the same spot, you know, as far as, okay, let's have a, you know, here's a project and this is what we're going to move forward with. When 75% of the people are in favor of it or of something, you know, doing something, I think it's, you know, it's kind of incumbent upon whoever's making these ultimate decisions to provide some direction and say, okay, this is the alternate we're going to use.
So I agree, and we had gotten to a point where the community thought, and I know there have been community members that have been frustrated by this, but the community had reached a pretty broad agreement on a particular alternative. But following that agreement, there was the discovery by the Caltrans project team that the retaining walls would be required in order to move forward with that. And so that really changed the nature of that alternative that the community had agreed upon. And so that is why they, you know, went back and started looking at, you know, a similar alternative, but something that could fit within a narrower right of way. And so that's why they looked at alternatives, and this other public workshop was held since that time. But it is, you know, certainly if the MCOG board wanted to provide direction on which approach to take, it's not agendized for any kind of action at this meeting. This is just discussion and comment, but that's something that we could plan for at a future board meeting.
Hey, thank you. And I think that would be a good thing to do.
I'm not seeing any hands from board members, but I'll ask a question. So Nafili, maybe you could clarify, we had reserved $3 million future MCOG funds, and then I thought you indicated that the revised project costs were estimated at $7 million. So is there an additional $4 million beyond our reserve that's needed?
Correct. So, right, we have a funding gap of about $4 million, which means that unless that $4 million is secured from something else, we wouldn't have the option of programming the $3 million that we have secured or that we have reserved.
Okay, all right. If we have no other board member questions or comments right now, maybe we could go to public comment. I see a hand raised from Tom Murphy.
Thank you. Yes, I'm Tom Murphy. I'm Vice Chair of the Gualala MAC. I've written to each of you to urge your council to take every possible opportunity to move quickly on this long overdue project. Supervisor Hasek is quite correct. Last Thursday, our council voted unanimously to advise expediting this work in the interest of public safety, economic recovery, and aesthetics important to our tourism-based community. I realize this is a discussion matter today and no decision is due. However, we hope that this discussion will include both the urgency and two other important considerations that have taken place since the Caltrans survey in January. We know that there is a lot of infrastructure priorities in the county, but the need for this one has been apparent since discussion began more than a quarter century ago. The vast predominance of comments at town halls, surveys, petitions support this project with landscape sidewalks, bike paths, and 3 lanes, one of which could be used for a turn lane and/or interim parking. Permanent parking on the highway would require a town plan amendment, and GMAC has not supported that. There will always be some who disagree about details, but 81% in the recent survey, as you heard, support this project, and that matches up closely with the GMAC survey in 2019. Looking at the alternatives Supervisor Hasek referred to, that showed 89% favored the project as long as there's some assurance parking could be protected from one of our supermarkets. And that, since the survey, has now been addressed by the owner of the surf center to add up to 90 plus off-highway spaces, open up an ocean view, and expand that market. That would, in my view, alleviate the parking on the highway on the south end of town. And that's a key area because the vision of oncoming traffic due to on-highway parking is very limited at the surf center. Caltrans recognized the need for a turn lane there due to congestion on the south end. Safety is an important consideration throughout this project. As you've heard, the project is needed to ensure safety of motorists, pedestrians, cyclists on the coast. And not just the down the coast cyclists, but people in town, get them out of their cars, moving around as an alternative transportation mode. Our seniors and our kids both deserve that opportunity. Currently, sidewalks are lacking at cycle share lanes with giant semi-trucks. For motorists, visibility of oncoming traffic is a problem, and some cars are forced to back out of perpendicular spaces into the oncoming highway lane, unable to see oncoming cars before they pull onto the highway. We recently had another serious accident on the highway, and that's the second development. That would likely have been avoided if there'd been a safer way to make a left turn than stopping in the middle of a lane. This project's also needed to speed our economic recovery, and I think it would be eligible for Recovery Act funds in our hard-hit area, where the economy is driven largely by retail and hospitality. Our hotels and restaurants are suffering. They need to recover, and this would help in that regard by making the town more attractive. Our 2002 town plan requires this portion of the highway to be a scenic element of town without highway parking. A change to that would require an amendment to the town plan that could delay this for years more and still keep that debate open in our community. It's been a long, suffering debate, and we'd like to get past that and move on to some more action. The current highway is blighted with cars for sale. It lacks landscaping and has rutted shoulders. It's generally unattractive to visitors. Once again, the supervisor is correct. We are looking at the same alternatives as 2 years ago. This is a time, the time for talking about this practice is past. We've had 26 years of that. With federal government talking about economic recovery and infrastructure funding, it's time to lock in Caltrans alternatives 1, 2, or 4. 1 and 2 are the ones that you looked at 2 years ago. They're virtually the same as 4, except that 4 adds a little bit of parking on the northeast end of town, where really nobody parks. We'd like to move forward with engineering and only include alternative 4 with the understanding that the parking would be on an interim basis and would not require a town plan amendment. We need to move forward with these to reduce risk of injury and death on the main street of Gualala. Thank you, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
Okay, I am not seeing any questions from board members right now.
So it looks like Rex did include a question in the chat regarding the status of the parking project at Surf Market. I know that that's been discussed in the community recently, and I know that John Bauer, who's the owner of that property, was considering being at this meeting today. So I'm going to ask if he is on the call and would be willing, if he is on the call, would be willing to comment on the timeline for that project and status of permits.
Can you hear me, Nafili? It's John.
Yes. Hi, John. Thank you. Did you hear the question?
Yes, I sure did. I've been here in the midst of this entire project for quite a while, and I've supported it from the beginning, but it seems to veered off track, and we're at a point where a couple of our buildings are now vacant, and there is a potential for us to do a complete revamp of the 2 parcels from the video store south through the old pharmacy up to the north end of the Surf Market. And that entire area, we all know people call it a blight and say that, you know, it's old. Right, it was built in the 50s and some additions in the 70s. But if we look at, this is a long-term project, Nafili. And I'm sorry that it takes so long, and I know we have a wonderful group. The entire town wants to see us make something that the town can really appreciate. It's going to take some time. And at this point, we don't have time frames. We don't have full plans. We only have sketches and don't have an architect put together. So we're still a long ways down the road. And I assume that the Coastal Commission will be urged to approve some very good plans for our community. And, you know, we have some roadblocks out there. And the biggest one we will continue to have for as long as I live here in the community is parking. And GMAC has taken that on as, okay, we have a set of plans, we're going to build something. No, not correct. They haven't talked to me. They really don't want to hear from me. They want to do their own thing, which only parking off the road. And we need that parking. If we do the project as we have some sketches put out there, the net gain for Surf Market for parking would be -5. Oops. That means that you just took all the rest of our parking away from us out in the street. And this community needs parking. We need auxiliary parking outside the community center for owners and operators and employees. This is not a simple thing. I would love to sit down and chat with some of the designers to see if we can work something that'll work out between us. But right now there is zero communication between myself and any of the designers from Caltrans. I want to talk to them. I want to be part of this. This is our community, and this is the gateway to Mendocino County, and I want to see it built well and nicely. So, like I say, it may take some time, Nafili, and I don't know how I answered your question here correctly or not, but there are no permits applied for at this point. We're still trying to find out what we need to do that.
If I could ask a follow-up question, Mr. Bauer, to clarify, so the concept is you would demolish a portion of your shopping center in order to accommodate the parking, so you would not be building a new structure, right?
No, that is incorrect. We are going to remove the buildings from which was the video store, which before that was an old gas station, south to Noma. No, that's all frontage and back behind frontage a little bit, and place as many as we can practically down the north line from west to east near the Surf Motel. And that would leave us maybe some 300 feet of horizontal view across the parking lot where it currently is. Now, how that parking lot's developed, you know, I kiddingly have said a stacked parking lot, you know, parking garage. But as we look at things, we grow, and we have to continue to grow, and we have to make room for that growth. And our town plan has to be changed. It is so wrong. But anyway, those would be torn down and in a series replaced against the north boundary, which is next to the Surf Motel. And then that parking lot would start to become opened and construction. It is going to be multi-phased, probably 5 or 6 phases to get through it, boundary line adjustment and some other things. I hope that answers your question.
I think it does, yeah. Do we have any other board member questions at this point? Director Brown?
Yeah, thank you. So we're several $1 million short.
Yes.
How far can we really go? I mean, maybe we can vote on what would be the best possible drawings. How far can we really go without recognizing funds to fulfill this project? Because even though I like the idea of everybody kicking in, everybody has their own infrastructure problems, And, you know, I think that nobody's going to give money away to help out Gualala. So how far can we really go without recognizing the funds to do this project?
So, you know, I think that talking about, you know, the preferred alternative that the MCOG board would like is something that we can do. If that's going to happen, I would like to allow enough time for the Caltrans design team to look at the sort of tweaks to the project that they are thinking of right now that Elias mentioned in his presentation, so that the MCOG board could have, you know, the full array of adjustments to consider to the alternatives before making any kind of decision. And then beyond that, we do have funding for right of way. So if the environmental and design were to move forward and the environmental were to be wrapped up, they could potentially start on the right of way component while we are working on securing construction funding. So I think that, you know, all of those future funding things are sort of at least several months in the future before we would potentially know anything about them. Another active transportation grant would be a year from now, but between now and then, we could certainly be working to secure some other sort of funding through stimulus or through complete streets with Caltrans. So we could be exploring other funding options while we wait for the next round of ATP grant funding to open up.
So we could make a recommendation. If we followed the survey, we could make a recommendation of the number 4, and then you would take that back and take the ball and run with it.
Yes, I think that I'll ask Caltrans to comment on this as well. But that I think is something that could happen. Like I said, I would like to give them some additional time before the MCOG board makes a decision. Of course, it's not an action item today, so that's not an option today, but it could be in the future, and maybe they can give an idea of how much time would be needed to assess the adjustments to the alternatives that were discussed. Elias or Frank or Liza, do any of you want to comment on that?
I'll let Elias comment on that. Nephili, this is Frank, but I did want to respond to the comment about funding on support costs. And right now, where we sit with our support costs here at Caltrans, the P&ED phase was, as you mentioned, programmed for $340,000 and PS&E for $575,000. Based on the STIP funding rules, Caltrans is able to contribute 20% of the combined amount of P&ED and PS&E, which totals $183,000. But to date, Caltrans has expended $505,000 total, which right now leaves us approximately $18,000 remaining to get to a final environmental document. So Caltrans will be putting in time on its own to get this over the finish line. So I'll let Elias go ahead and answer questions about the time it will take to finish the feasibility study for the 3 items that he presented in the presentation over here. Elias?
Yeah, there's 3 main points that the community asked us to look at, and it's not as simple as just draw it up. I mean, we draw it up, we need to work with environmental, assess new right-of-way impacts, and assess the project costs. So it's going to take several months for us to do that. After we do that, I'd like to go back to the community and present those alternatives, or revised alternatives, and then get their feedback on that. So also it'll affect the project cost, the total project cost, by adding in those elements that we discussed. So it's not, I know the ATP grant is next year, and I was thinking we would try and work towards updating alternatives within the next few months and go late summer, early fall back to the community and get feedback in time to reapply for the application for the ATP next year, which is around March or something, right? So I don't know. I guess if that answers your time frame question, that's what I was thinking we would be doing. Okay.
So it sounds like then maybe early fall would be a point when this could come back to the MCOG board for some sort of a decision and have those additional modifications to the alternative as part of the consideration.
I'll have a follow-up question for Frank or for Elias. Did the last ATP grant get scored? Did you see any feedback as to what might get a higher score?
Yeah, I think Nafili and I both attended that, and I was really backseat driver. Nafili knows all about it, but we went through every category and the points associated and what we scored and how we can improve it, and they gave us some tips about things that we were doing, but maybe we just didn't promote it well enough, and we can promote like the extensive public outreach and different methods of public outreach, which would have scored us a little higher. It wasn't apparent in the application, and they gave us some tips on ways to improve that. And they also give us ways that we can get like an independent check before we submit to improve the quality and potential increased score. So they gave us some sort of guidance on how we can improve for next time. And I think working with Nafili, I think we'll be able to improve the score a little bit. And we were really close, right? What was it? What was the score? I forgot.
Yeah, well, we were about 12 points below the cutoff line. So it's not an insurmountable gap in points. Some of the things that were of concern, like I mentioned, there are things that we can't change, like lack of a school in the area. But there were things that we can talk about, such as how it might potentially enhance the first and last mile for transit access. They suggested potentially adding in a non-infrastructure component to the active transportation grant, which is what we had a couple of years ago in conjunction or with Walk and Bike Mendocino, but essentially to promote and educate the community about encourage use of the new walking and biking facilities. And they gave some ideas about how better to make the project a more transformative nature. There are certain things that we're limited on because it's a Caltrans implemented project. We really have to stay with this project on the state facility, although they had suggested, including some of the streets, the county roads that connect to the residential neighborhoods. But because it's two different agencies, it's really not an option. So we do have some limits to how we can improve, but also some ideas on what we can do. They also offered, pending future capability to travel, CTC staff offered to come do site visit to the community and look at ways to improve the project or improve the project application.
Okay, thanks. Any other board member questions? Director Khan?
I just wanted to make a comment regarding the sense of urgency. As a community member in a town that waited 50 years for a highway bypass, I'm fully empathetic to the frustrations of the people of Gualala. But I will say that our bypass is now 3 years in the rearview mirror. And I know that doesn't help you at the moment, but trust me, if it can happen in Willits, it will happen in Gualala. And I just wanted to say, hang on. I think your project is an important one. Everyone here sees that, and just hold steady.
Thank you, Director Connie. I really appreciate that comment. I know sometimes it feels like these projects take forever, but that, unfortunately is the nature of transportation projects.
Okay, do we have any other public comment on this item?
I do see a hand raised, George Provencher.
George Provencher. I'm a former member of GMAC in Gualala and currently a board member at RCMS. And I live right in the town of Gualala, barely a block off of Highway 1. I wanted to make just a couple of brief comments. It kind of has to do with focus and priorities, but there are a couple of things that I think are kind of realistic in all this. One is that the planning department really doesn't have any desire or appetite in the future to amend the town plan in Gualala. It's a costly process in the county budget. They only get about 5 projects a year. They're allowed by the Coastal Commission for zoning changes. And they usually reserve 1 project solely for the county, which only leaves 4. The odds of setting a high enough priority for Gualala to get one of its, any of its various development zones amended or changed is pretty low. The other thing is about the parking itself. The town plan says pretty specifically there's to be no parking anywhere on Highway 1. The boundaries of the town plan run for about 14 miles along Highway 1. So if you want to enforce no parking, you might have to put signs up for 14 miles in both directions. But in the future, the issue of parking really should not be the single biggest determinant or priority in the project. It would make a lot more sense for the project team to basically take all of the input they've received. There's been a lot of it. And I participated in the survey. There were about 189 people in close proximity in the last survey. And it was fairly, evenly spread in terms of various opinions. The reality is that once the design constraints are addressed, there really isn't a lot of parking along Highway 1 regardless, if you're going to avoid putting in the retaining walls, that sort of thing. I think it's important and essential right now. It's just my opinion, but I think it's essential for the project team, Frank Demling, to just say, look, we have received all this input, and yes, there are a lot of things that are obvious. The reality is we think that this is our best recommendation based on all the input that we've had. With a single recommendation, people will adjust to that in one form or another. And in the worst case, what will happen down the road is that, so to speak, is that people will park wherever they can park. Unless there's a sign that says don't park here, they're going to park in it if there's a place or room to park. If there is no room to park, they're not going to park there. The reality is that owners don't really direct people to park. Yes, they benefit from people parking in close proximity to their stores. We don't have reserved parking for Gualala Supermarket or the bank or the post office or any of the businesses and buildings around the area. I think the higher priority needs to be placed on the funding and the completion of the design. The reality is that anybody who thinks that, well, we ought to change the town plan, we need to amend the town plan. The town plan has some flaws, it has some errors. There's some things that don't make mathematical sense, but the county is pretty much, with their past actions, have indicated that, and I'm talking about county planning, they've indicated that they want to be able to just work on a project by project basis. So anytime somebody comes in with with a new development permit, they want to break it down into working on that particular project and not address the town plan or the planned development zone or the commercial zone or any of those things. So those are realities. So the thing that stands out the most in all of this is being able to fund the project and being able to have a definitive enough design that you can actually develop an estimate for the project and a budget for it. So with all of that, my suggestion is, let's let Caltrans make their recommendations and go from there. And I think people will adjust to it. You're never going to make everybody happy, but a lot of the things, I've listened to a lot of people over time. I actually agree with a lot of things that Tom Murphy has said about the options that we have. Some of these things could probably be time phased, but I think it's time to really look at what are the real priorities in all of this. Right now, today, I look down the street in Gualala, we don't have a paved street in Gualala. Everything is stopped, from one end of town to the other, and nothing is happening. And I think that's something that needs to be addressed. The safe streets, bicycle lanes, these are all things that, they've been legislated. The town plan has been there for a long time. I don't agree with having a 14-mile no parking zone, but the reality is nobody's going to enforce that anyway. The county's not going to put up a no parking sign every 20 feet for 14 miles. That's ridiculous. So that's all I have to say. I think what we really do need, and I think I heard it earlier, was we need someone to take leadership in this and step forward and say, look, this is the best that we can come up with given all the input that we've been given, and then move on.
Okay, thank you. In the chat, I see we have a request for comment from David Spack.
Thank you very much. I'm going to just comment briefly since those before me have really hit on all the hard topics. Just a recognition that the funding environment that we're in now and likely for the future increasingly emphasizes shovel readiness. And that's a significant constraint, but it doesn't happen by continued planning. Essentially, the strategy that really is essential now and likely in the near and medium term is for us to advance on the fronts where we have funding and have the mobilization to complete work. And specifically, to Mr. Provencher's point, let's complete design. You can't be shovel ready unless design's done. To Mr. Demling's comment, if Caltrans has sufficient budget to complete PAED, complete the environmental document, let's do so. Let's keep pushing this ball forward because it will not advance if we continue to spin our wheels in this fashion. It's clear based on the information that's available to the board that the community is overwhelmingly in favor of a streetscape project that will improve conditions for all modes, but particularly make Gualala a comfortable and safe place to be a pedestrian. And that really is the most profound lens through which we need to see this area. It is a place in need of a complete street. It is the front door of the county. It is a vital community center and economic center. It is a place where, as experience grows throughout the country and the world, we need to encourage people to park their cars and get out and move around on foot. And that's, we really just need to move forward with that objective. So please, don't wait for months because that is not necessary. There is plenty of information and evidently adequate budget to proceed to complete the refinements for design, get it to an endpoint, complete environmental studies and documentation, get to a point where this project can attract the next, hopefully best chunk of money. Waiting for ATP doesn't make sense. Stimulus may pop. There's measures in Congress that may move rather quickly. But as we've seen in the last several years, and certainly in this year, these situations arrive at a tipping point and move quickly, rather than the historic kind of, 5-year rolling cycle of an RTIP or a regional transportation plan. So please, don't hesitate. continue to move forward, take action as quickly as possible, but continue to move forward, move this project forward. Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, I don't see any other public comments, but we'll go back one more time to Tom Murphy, GMAC.
Thank you, Dan. Yeah, I just wanted to address a couple of comments. In the ATP funding, there is no school in downtown Gualala on this 0.6 of a mile stretch. However, there is a school bus stop there. It would be nice if kids in town could ride their bikes to the school bus stop safely and not share it with cement mixers and lumber trucks. Also, the most recent petition by the Save Gualala group has collected nearly 1,600 signatures that do request bike lanes, sidewalks, landscaping, and the 3-lane design, with that 3rd lane being used for interim parking if needed. And the other thing is there's been a lot of talk about the parking situation. And if it's allowed for me to share a screen, I could show you 3 overhead views that show the parking in Gualala. And the earlier sketch that Mr. Bauer presented on this project, I know that he's in the process of updating and reviewing that. He spoke with GMAC last month and gave us a very optimistic outlook on that. I realize this is going to take a couple of years, and he may need some interim parking down there, and GMAC has supported that all along. May I share a screen?
So Myra, I will leave the decision up to the chair, but my recommendation would be to provide that information. You know, you can send it to board members or provide it by email, but I'll leave it up to the chair if you feel that would be a useful addition to this public comment.
It's just 3 slides, and I think it'll greatly illuminate the discussion.
Okay, briefly.
Thank you.
And let me just, while Tom is working on getting his screen shared, and Tom, you should have the ability to share screen now.
Okay, thanks.
I'll just want to follow up on a comment that the previous commenter made, just in terms of the time needed for Caltrans to wrap up their design, and sort of in defense of the Caltrans design team. You know, they've all been working very hard on this project and really dedicated a lot of time, but we have to also remember that this is not the only project that any of them are working on. They all have lots of projects that take up a lot of time, many of them also within Mendocino County. So just, you know, we want to make sure that we're cognizant of the demands on their time.
You can
Sure.
see it. Can you make it?
Can you see my screen now?
Yes, if you can.
You know, unfortunately, I don't think I can boost this one too much. Let me see if I can.
Well, there's a plus
Yeah.
at the top on your menu there.
Yeah.
There you go.
Okay, that's as big as I can make this one. I have another one that's a little larger on the north end of town. This is the south end, and this area here is the surf market area. And I'm going to show you the sketch that John had designed earlier to renovate this. And what we're talking about is interim parking along here, where there is currently about 5 spaces. So yes, if we took those out now, it would be a loss of 5 spaces. But we've also suggested interim parking here until John is able to complete his permit work here. We'll go to the next one. These aren't actually slides, so I have to kind of do this manually. Okay, this is the north end of town. Come on. Sorry, this is getting harder. Okay, this is the north end of town. All these redlined areas show the parking areas that are available in Gualala. Hardly anybody parks along the highway, especially on the north end of town. You can see there's no cars in this Google overhead. There's over 600 spaces off the highway now. John's project would add about another 90 according to the schematic he had earlier. I don't know if that'll change. And let me get the third one up here. This is the drawing that John was working on earlier. And it shows, I think, a little bit better. Here's the surf market which would be expanded out in front and eliminate some parking there, but it'd add in this drawing 92 spaces and then realign the buildings along the north side of the property. And I realize this is subject to change. We're very eager to continue speaking with Mr. Bauer. We had a very positive conversation with him last week, and that's available on the GMAC YouTube site. That's all I wanted to share, but I hope that's helpful.
Okay, thanks. In the comment, I saw that Frank Demley would like to add a comment.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I just wanted to also make note that the alternatives that were presented earlier today, alternative 4A and 4B, as well as 4C, which we're currently refining, all will require retaining walls. The exact heights are not known at this time, but even narrowing from the 54 to the 60-foot width will require some retaining walls. So just because we moved away from alternative 3 doesn't mean that retaining walls have been eliminated. That's all I have.
Hello, this is John here. John Bauer, could I speak, please?
Okay, go ahead.
Yes, I reviewed a couple things here with Frank. You know, he's got some ideas about retaining walls, but, you know, the shock is that we have them. They're here now. People don't see them because they're well vegetated. Having retaining walls doesn't have to be this monstrous, cathodic concrete wall. It can be very well obscured by plantings and other things. And the other part of this is that I know that GMAC really wants to see my project go, but they're saying that there'll be 90 parking places. Well, right now we have 45 in the back for all the customers' employees, or all of the company's employees, and we have about 50 in the front. 25 along the front and 25 that are going to be split off with the new break of the Caltrans improvement. So we'll be down to less than 25 in the front and come up to 90. Well, let's see, if I had 50 and 45, how close to 90 is that? Like I said, we're minus 4 or 5. We're not going to have the parking. We cannot possibly get it the way we're going. We need to start to look for some new thoughts and ideas to bring this parking back into town.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any new members of the public who wish to comment?
I'm not a new one.
Well, so we can't just keep this going on. So we've got some other agenda items. So I think what we've heard from the public is a request that we keep this project moving forward and not wait for all funding before we move to the next step. Nafili, I know that you've put a lot of time and effort into this project as well as Caltrans, and I appreciate that. I think the board appreciates the work of MCOG staff to keep this project moving ahead. And I don't know that we really need a motion at this point. It's not an action item, but I think we can bring this back for a future agenda item where we'd have action as soon as you're ready for an action item.
All right, thank you. Yes, so we'll plan. I'll work with Elias and the rest of the Caltrans project team, and we'll come up with sort of maybe a target date for bringing this back.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks. The next two items on our agenda are related to the executive committee recommendations, and those are item number 6A and 6B.
All right. So 6A is the draft budget, and Janet will be presenting that item.
Thank you. Yes, the executive committee met on February 25th to review the draft budget. And you have my staff report and a one-page summary in the packet. So it's all good news. The sales tax revenues have been coming in at high levels. We're just wrapping up the fiscal audit now for fiscal year 1920, and those revenues exceeded 4 million, met 4 million for the first time. We haven't seen that before. And they have been coming in high this year, and they're projected to go higher in the coming year for the budget that we're working on now for fiscal year 2021-22. So the main things to know about this budget is what we looked at are increases to the county auditor's estimate. And also in the current year we're in now, 2021, we had held back from allocating those projected increases because no one was at all sure a year ago that those would materialize. So this board refrained from allocating the full estimate. So,
excuse me, Janet, could you screen share the parts that you want us to look at?
Oh, I don't know. I don't have that up and ready to go. In your packet, there's this one-page summary sheet, and I'm
I'll find it. Okay, I thought you
the
might.
first column of that one.
I'll bring it up.
Do we have
I'll
anyone
do a
on staff there that's got that they could share that's open?
Yeah, I'll bring it up.
Thank you. Maybe I'll keep talking while you do that.
Yep.
All right, so the staff's proposal had an option A and an option B for the committee to consider. And we wanted to release the projected increases from this year, which would not automatically flow into next year's budget. And we thought those should be released because we do see that money coming in now. So the beneficiary of that would be MTA. Under allocations, administration is only asking for the CPI rate increase. So we're only up about 1% in this proposal. Okay, so now you have my screen share here. And you'll see this well, I can't point to it with my mouse, can I? That first column, LTF, under the Transportation Development Act there, that's the sales tax revenue. All right, so that very first line is the 4 million plus estimate is 4.5 million this year, coming in very high. So I'm working my way down that column. And what I was going to describe for you is that we don't have a lot of need under the MCOG programs for increases to our allocation. So administration is fine. We're only up about 1% in this request. We're easily able to allocate the 2% for bike and pedestrian program, and planning is actually asking for a little bit less money. So the beneficiary of all this would be Mendocino Transit Authority. So we had two options on the table, and I'm going to say this a little backwards, but option B would have put into the local transportation fund reserve, which is available to MTA's operating needs. That would have been at the minimum level of 5%. So the option A proposal, with all this revenue coming in, was to double that to 10% and have a higher amount than just the minimum there. So that would have brought, and that is the proposal you're looking at. The little calculation is down here under LTF reserve. So that has 452,000 set aside for MTA's possible needs. MTA controls that reserve. So MTA management supported this proposal, and so did the executive committee. And what's important to know about that is that we're trying to help them to build up their cash reserves. The independent fiscal auditors have recommended to MTA that they have a 3 months of operating cash on hand. So that's the advice. They don't have that. So this would at least provide 1 month of reserves for cash operating needs should that arise. So it's heading in the right direction. And that's still, even after doubling that reserve, that still brings the proposed amount available for transit to claim at over 4 million. So this would be about a 14.5% increase available for transit to claim, and it also means that the senior center transportation programs would receive that same percentage increase for their operations. So everybody liked that. This is also, it does need to help to offset losses in gas tax, because while we have sales tax revenue coming in high, the gas tax is down. It was down 40% in this year, according to the state controller's estimate. And this coming year in this new budget, that's the second column you see here, at about 650,000. That's down, by about a quarter. That's 20 or 25% down from what it's been. So this needs to make up for some of that as well. So it's looking good. It is kind of a windfall for transit, but it's really only a 5% average increase over the past 5 years. So that is the proposal. We don't ask for any action today. The committees will be meeting in April and May. We did receive the MTA transit claim on April 1st when it was due, and we'll be reviewing that in committee for a recommendation to the board. We'll have a budget workshop in May and adopt the budget in June. Are there any questions? I'll just note that on the rest of the sheet you're looking at, there are a lot of other numbers. There are some other funding programs in there. The sales tax is what we're concerned with primarily right now. That's what funds operations and MCOG's programs the most. And we're also waiting for some pending estimates on that page there. We don't have all the numbers in yet. A lot of that flows through the planning program.
Okay, I'm not seeing any board member questions. Do we have any questions or comments from members of the public this time? Not seeing any.
I guess not. So anyway, we're very pleased with this, and this is all pretty good news for us.
Okay, well then that takes us to item 6B, which is also the executive committee. That's an extension on the contract for professional services.
Yes. So as you mentioned, this was the other recommendation to come out of the executive committee. So just some background on this. All staffing for the Mendocino Council of Governments is provided by contract. Fiscal and administrative services through Dow & Associates, and planning services through Davy Bates Consulting. So those contracts were originally awarded with 5-year terms and followed by the option for 5 one-year extensions. The first 5-year period of the contracts came to an end in 2019. And so at that time, there was a fairly extensive process involved in determining whether or not to exercise the option to move forward with an extension and getting that approved. That process included the executive committee, multiple MCOG board meetings, and an ad hoc committee. And so ultimately the MCOG board opted for the extension, and then the contractors worked with the ad hoc committee on those extensions, which were approved for that first 1-year period. And at that time, the committee also indicated a preference for a more streamlined approach to the contract continuation for staffing services in future years. So we are now nearing the end of the second extension period. So following that first extension approval in 2019, a second extension was approved using the more streamlined approach in 2020. That 1-year extension period will end September of this year. And so we went to the executive committee with their preference, or to ask for their recommendation on a preference for continued staffing services following that period. And the executive committee did recommend approval of additional 1-year extensions with both Dow and Associates and Davy Bates Consulting. The draft extensions are included in your packet, and those are the same documents that were provided to the executive committee. These would run through then September of 2022. The contract amounts are at the base rates shown in the exhibits to the extensions. Those are then run through a calculation using a cumulative consumer price index rates for each year. Those amounts actually take effect with the start of each fiscal year, although the extension periods run October of one year through September. So there's a little overlap between fiscal years and the extension periods. We do also have included in these two extensions this time around some credits that the contractors are providing to MCOG due to cost savings related to travel in this current fiscal year. So those would be applied automatically without any additional action beyond the extensions. So Lisa Davy Bates is also in the meeting to represent Davy Bates Consulting. And regarding the recommendation of the executive committee, I will ask the executive committee members if they have anything to add regarding that recommendation. And if there are any questions about that recommendation, I would ask that those be directed to the executive committee members.
Not seeing any comments right now. Do we need any questions or comments from board members? Okay, I'm not seeing any.
John Hashak.
Yeah, Chair,
Dr. Hashak. Okay.
yeah, I think it was over a year ago that you and I were part of the ad hoc that looked at this extension, the previous extension. And so it seems like this is in line what we were seeing before. And so I'd recommend it.
Okay, right.
Is that a motion?
There's another comment.
Yeah, Director Connie.
I have a question. I'm happy to second that if that was a motion, but I do have a question. It sounds like we can do extensions for the next 2 years. Then what happens? Is there a plan for restarting this process?
Yes, so what the contract allows for is, as I mentioned, it was an initial 5-year period and then 5 one-year extensions. Following that 5th extension though, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, there would be really no option other than to, well, I guess the MCOG board would always have the option of public staffing, but to continue with contract staffing, MCOG would need to go through a full procurement process with an RFP and competitive procurement process. So it would sort of start over with a longer term contract, most likely at that point in time.
So I guess my question is, does it make sense to start looking at that now rather than waiting till the 11th hour?
So if you're thinking about looking at it for this year, or are you asking about looking at starting that now to be prepared for 2 years from now?
The latter.
Okay, so I think actually that's a really good point, and maybe you wouldn't need to start on it now, but definitely you would want to allow plenty of time for that. It's not something that, so because staff is, we are the contractors, so we don't manage that RFP process ourselves. One of the member agencies has to take that on, and so, you know, just staffing demands on local agency staff need to be considered, and how much time that would take for them to develop an RFP and go through that process. I know the last time it took several months, and so I would say probably you would want to allow at least a year for the full process, if not longer.
Yeah, so just for clarifications, last time it was the County of Mendocino staff that primarily put together the RFP and helped accept and review the applications, but then it was the board, of course, that reviewed the applicants and made the selection. So yeah, I would think it would be, we've got a little more time here because it's still a few more fiscal years. So I did think I heard a motion from Director Hashak and a second from Director Connie to accept the recommendation of the executive committee. Do we have any members of the public who wish to comment on this item? Not seeing any. Can we have a roll call?
Director Brown,
Yes.
Director Connie,
Yes.
Director Ignacio,
Yes.
Director Alvin Smith,
Yes.
Director Haschak,
Yes.
Director Jackman,
Yes.
and Chair Jurdy.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your continued confidence in us. We're glad to keep serving MCOG.
Okay, thank you. That brings us to item 7A, which is amendment to the 2020 Regional Transportation Improvement Program.
All right, James Stickney will be presenting this item.
Good afternoon. Before you is an amendment to the RTIP, Regional Transportation Improvement Program, to shift some funds around for the City of Ukiah's roundabout project at Bush and Low Gap. This project has been in existence, I think, since 2012. We programmed some funds for environmental and design then, and then construction was programmed in 2014, deprogrammed in 2016 due to some budget cuts at the state level, and then reprogrammed in the 2020 RTIP. So in December, the City of Ukiah finalized a traffic study that looked at that intersection as well as other intersections around the high school and Frank Zeke and that whole area. And one of the recommendations was a roundabout at that intersection. However, with a different design, rather than a lot of concrete, they're proposing to do less concrete and more striping. And in doing so, construction costs will decrease. However, it will increase the design costs. And so city staff talked to some engineering firms to get an idea of how much they needed to move. And they, based on those preliminary discussions, they needed about $300,000 in design and about $500,000 or so in construction. The PPR that is attached with the staff report shows the exact figures. I believe it's $263,000 for design, and then the rest is in construction. And so we took this before the TAC to get their recommendation, and the TAC approved that recommendation and forwarded it to the board here. I did have to submit this amendment request to Caltrans to meet their guideline or their schedule to make the May meeting. It needs to go to the May meeting for notice and then the June meeting for action. And so, assuming that the board approves this, I will leave it as is. If for some reason they don't, we can always pull it. And so, are there any questions?
I'm not seeing any. Although Director Brown, I thought I saw your hand near your iPad. Was that, were you raising your hand or just adjusting the iPad?
My thumb got in the way. But I will say that this went before the city council, and a watered down version of the roundabout was more acceptable than what was originally presented. And it was unanimous by the city council to go forward with the new design.
Do we have any public comments on this item? I'm not seeing any. Director Connie.
I move to accept the recommendation.
Ignacio seconds.
Okay, we've got a motion and a second. Can you conduct the roll?
Director Brown,
Yes.
Connie,
Yes.
Ignacio,
Yes.
Alvin Smith,
Yes.
Haschak,
Yes.
Jackman,
Yes.
Chair Judy.
Okay, now we're on to 7B, which is fourth amendment, the overall work program.
All right, you have a staff report in the packet that was prepared by Alexis Pedrati. She's not able to attend the meeting today, so I am going to do my best to present the item for you. So the City of Ukiah in our planning work program had a $45,000 project to conduct a sidewalk maintenance and ADA curb ramp inventory. That was funded with our local transportation fund, so the most flexible funding source that we have in the OWP. We fairly recently received a request from the City of Ukiah to change that and use the funding, delete the sidewalk inventory and use that funding towards a new project that they feel is of higher importance, which is to do a study to assess trenching, utility trenching in the streets, and which would allow them to then assess fees and recover costs associated with trenching by contractors and utilities that then would require street repairs. Trenching has been happening for a long time in the city, but now that due to their sales tax measure, the overall quality of the streets is coming up. It is becoming a more pressing issue to recover the costs associated with that utility trenching. And they need to collect some data and do a study in order to do that. They do still find that ADA is a priority for them and curb ramps. However, they have another fairly recent study that can guide their improvements over the next few years that allows them to put off the next round of ADA study before that would be needed in order to do inventory or infrastructure improvements. So the technical advisory considered this request from the City of Ukiah at their March meeting, and they did recommend approval to delete the ADA curb ramp inventory and allow the City of Ukiah to add a new project for their trench cut fee study. The initial project, the ADA curb ramp inventory, was awarded in a cycle of projects in which all projects that were applied for were funded. So there were no projects that went unfunded because of the ADA project. And so that also went into the decision-making process. So you have the tax recommendation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Not seeing any questions or comments. I have one. I remember several years ago, the City of Fort Bragg, and they may be doing this on an ongoing basis, but several years ago that knowing that they were going to be paving some roads in town, they sent letters to property owners who had undeveloped or seriously underdeveloped properties and asked if they had any intentions of establishing a larger water meter or meter connection, which would require trenching. Is the Ukiah project similar to that? Because if people are given advance notice, that they could be told, connect now before the road is repaired, resurfaced, or the city could say, there's no new connections after the road is resurfaced for maybe 3 or 5 years, unless you pay this higher fee.
So I don't know, and unfortunately, we don't have any city. No, there is a phone number that I'm not sure, but there may be city staff on the call.
There is city staff on the call. This is Tim Erickson.
So Tim, did you hear the question?
Yeah, we heard that question. Actually, we have been replacing the utilities and the laterals in the areas where we're doing the kind of streets that we want to protect by just this sort of project. The thing that we have limited control of is like PG&E's gas and those kind of things. So it's more really when the bigger utilities come in and do large projects or one time if what we want to do with this study is also set up a moratorium process where, and I know that's how you do that is very laid out in procedures that you have to follow in order to have a moratorium for adding a new service. There's a notification process. So we would be interested in refining those procedures as part of this study.
Okay, great. Sounds like it's even maybe more comprehensive than what Fort Bragg did several years ago. Director Hashek?
Well, I move to approve the Fourth Amendment to the fiscal year 2021 overall work program.
Is there a second?
I'll second. Jim.
Okay, we've got a second to that motion. Can we have a roll call?
Director Brown?
Yes.
Connie?
Yes.
Ignacio?
Yes.
Alvin Smith?
Yes.
Pastor?
Yes.
Jackman?
Yes.
Jurdy?
Yes. Okay, that brings us to item 8, which is coronavirus response relief supplemental appropriations and funding discussion and direction.
All right. So as we kind of touched on briefly in our discussion about the Gualala project, MCOG does know of one stream of stimulus funding that will be coming to regional agencies through the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act of 2021, also known as CRISA or HR 133. So the act was enacted into law December 27th of 2020, and following that, the state, once they knew how much would be coming to the state, began working with local agencies, holding workshops to determine how best to distribute the funding. So there is $911.8 million for transportation infrastructure coming to California through that act. And it was determined fairly early on that 60% of that would go to the state so that they would have that available to use in their SHOP program or in the ITIP, and then 40% would go to the regions. And so the CTC and Caltrans headquarters worked with regional agencies and other stakeholders to develop formulas for distributing that funding and receive feedback on the proposed formulas. Ultimately, they ended up at a distribution method that runs half of the funding through the STIP formula, and STIP uses both population and centerline miles to distribute funding. And then the other half of the funding through the STBG formula, which is reliant solely on population. So it favors the urban areas much more heavily. It also means that not only will the money be determined based on the formulas of those programs, but they will actually, part of the funding will run through the STIP program and part of the funding will run through the STBG program. So it'll be distributed through 2 different programs. So the total amount coming to the Mendocino County region is $1,198,132. Of that, the let's see, I'm sorry, that was the STIP portion. The total portion is $1,622,007, of which $198,132 is the STIP portion. That does include 59,000 or approximately 60,000 of PPM funding. That's planning, programming, and monitoring. And that's the STIP money that can fund planning activities and is programmed through our work program. And then 423,875 through the STBG formula, or RSTP as we used to refer to it. So we've discussed this with the TAC, knowing that it was in the works. We've discussed this with them, and they all indicated an interest in distributing the money by formula. STBG money is always distributed by formula. However, STIP, when STIP money comes to MCOG, we typically use a competitive project selection method for those funds. However, because the intent of the stimulus funding is partially to make up for lost revenues, and because of the division between the two funding programs, staff is supportive of the TAC members' interest in distributing money by formula in this instance. This is one-time funding, and it is the STIP portion is not affected by our previous county shares. So regardless of what we have programmed previously, we will have access to this money at this time. We'll also have some options in terms of programming the STIP money. The CTC is planning to adopt a program of projects as early as their June meeting, which is why we have this before you today to provide some direction, and we want to start working with the TAC as soon as possible so that we can be ready to submit projects for that June meeting. The other option would be to have that money added to what we'll have available for programming in the 2022 RTIP, which we'll be working on this fall. And then the STBG, we don't quite know how that will work yet and what the timeline with that will be, but is typically a more flexible funding source. We also will be, we anticipate that we will get state-only funding through both of these, just due to the overall low dollar amount. The alternative to a formula distribution would be to have part or all of the funding distributed through a competitive process. We could do the STIP funding competitively and still distribute the STBG by formula, although it's such an overall low amount, it's not going to equal a whole lot to any one agency. Or we could do the whole thing competitively. If we were to do that, we do have project applications from previous STIP cycles that the application processes that we would rely on for that. So today I'm asking for board direction regarding whether to distribute funds, whether to work with the TAC to come up with a formula distribution, and then a program of projects that we would submit as required by the CTC and Caltrans, or to conduct a competitive application cycle, call for projects with our local agencies.
Do we have Director questions or comments? Director Hashak?
Thank you, Chair Judy. So if I get this right, if we just go with the formula, then you don't think that there'll be any projects out there that will really be negatively affected? Do you know of any projects that, would be looking for this money?
So we just, in the discussions that we've had with the TAC members, and we kind of gave them some ballpark figures of what we might be looking at if we were to use a formula, which would vary a lot depending on what base amount we would start with. Because we have some very small agencies, we typically, with any formula distribution, we start with a base so that everybody's getting a usable amount, something more than just what it will cost them to administer it. So depending on the amount of that base, it would vary for each agency. There were discussions about bridge projects. Essentially, it was all existing projects that they're going to be doing anyway that they would be able to add this funding to. As I mentioned, the overall funding amount is less than $2 million, which is, in terms of starting, doing a brand new project from scratch, it's a pretty low dollar amount to get through project development and fully fund, right of way and construction. There are also time constraints, and so the types of projects that people would be looking at for this type of funding, similar to when we had the ARA funding years ago, would be either projects that are already in the works and moving forward that can use supplemental funding, or easier projects to implement, like paving overlay or rehab projects, that type of thing that the agencies can get done faster and easier. So no, they all had ideas about specific projects that they could supplement with this funding.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have other questions or comments? Do we have any members of the public wishing to comment on this item? Would someone like to make a motion?
I'll make the motion that we adopt the recommendation that a formula distribution be used to award funding to local agencies.
I'll second.
Okay, and just briefly, Nafili, it'll come back at a future board meeting. Any estimate of when that would come back?
So we will probably present the TAC with draft distribution at their April meeting. And then the actual distribution could come back at the next MCOG meeting. However, I would expect, well, no, if we're aiming for submitting something to the CTC in time for the program and projects to be adopted in June, we would need to bring that back at the May MCOG meeting as well. So you'll have at least a draft list of projects at your next meeting.
Okay, thanks. All right, could we have a roll call?
Director Brown?
Yes.
Connie?
Yes.
Ignacio?
Yes.
Alvin Smith?
Yes.
Paschak?
Yes.
Jackman?
Yes.
Chair Jurdy?
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Okay, next item is the calendar. Well, actually number 9 on our regular calendar, which is a letter of opposition to AB 786.
Yes, so I included a draft letter of opposition to AB 786 in your packet for consideration. So this proposed legislation would change the executive director of the California Transportation Commission from a position that's appointed by the commission to a position that's appointed by the governor. So the California Transportation Commission, they are the state agency that approves most of the funding that flows through MCOG, as well as approves Caltrans funding for projects and grant, the competitive grant programs through SB1. So they are involved in all the major transportation decisions in the state. They are a 13-member commission. 11 of those members are voting, and there are 2 ex officio members. Of the 11 voting members, 9 of them are appointed by the governor. They serve specific terms, and so when those terms are up, whoever the governor is able to appoint new members to the commission. And then the other 2 are appointed by the Senate Rules Committee and Speaker of the Assembly. So the commission itself is already made up of political appointees. However, staff is bipartisan. That allows them to better support the commissioners, but also provide help to local agencies. The current executive director of the commission is Mitchell Weiss. who, in my experience, has done a great job of being a bipartisan staff person that is supportive of both urban and rural agencies, and has a staff that does a great job of serving the commission. I have concerns with how a politically appointed executive director could affect rural agencies. Oftentimes, we already have a hard time making sure that our voice as a rural region is heard, because we don't represent a lot of voters already. We don't represent a lot of people. And so I have concerns that that could be an even greater problem by having staff then be politically appointed. So that was the reasoning behind the letter, and I'm happy to answer any questions. This is also something it's been discussed in the Rural Counties Task Force and some of the other statewide organizations. So other regional agencies are concerned about this as well.
Director Brown.
I support sending the letter of opposition.
I second that.
Okay, got a motion and a second. Any, do we have any members of the public wishing to comment on this item? Not seeing any. Any board members? Okay, can we have the roll call?
Director Brown,
Yes.
Connie,
Yes.
Ignacio,
Yes.
Alvin Smith, she says yes. Okay.
There I am. I couldn't find the button.
Hashtag,
Yes.
Jackman,
Yes.
and Chair Judy.
Yes. Okay, that takes us to item number 10, which is a delegate alternate to the CALCOG. Is anyone interested in being an alternate delegate to CALCOG?
Maybe it would help. So Tess is our main alternate, and how much of a demand on your time do you think it is?
Oh, not very much at all. They have meetings quarterly, and then once a year they have a big, well, on Zoom it's been one day, but it's generally a retreat kind of meeting, and then it's followed by a leadership, which is optional, but very informative. And you're playing with the big boys, you know, the ABAG and eBay Mud and all those. So you really hear a lot. Not so much applicable to our little area, but there is a lot of ideas that come forth. So I highly encourage someone to want to be an alternate in case I can't go, which was the case last year, but they canceled it. So anyway.
They only have 4 meetings left to go, it looks like, for the fiscal year, or for the calendar year, I should say. The annual forum is over with.
Okay, Director Hashek.
Yeah.
Well, I think I've been an alternate in the past, even though I was never used, but I would be an alternate again.
Okay. Sounds like we have a willing director, willing to be the alternate. See a thumbs up from Director Brown.
You need a nomination, or are you good?
Appointed by the
Probably
council.
needs a nomination.
Yeah, so someone on the board needs to nominate.
So nominated, Director Hatchett.
I'll second that.
Nope. Good.
Okay, we've got a motion and a second. Any public comment on this item? Not seeing any. Can we have a roll call?
Director Brown,
Yes.
Connie,
Yes, and thank you, John.
Ignacio,
Yes, and thank you, John.
Alvin Smith,
Yes.
Hashtag,
No, yes.
Jackman,
Yes.
and Chair Judy.
Yes. Okay, I think that may take us to the consent calendar. Would someone like to make a motion to approve the consent calendar?
Motion to approve consent calendar.
Second.
Okay. Do we have any public comment on the consent calendar? Okay, not seeing. Can we have a roll call?
Director Brown,
Yes.
Connie,
Yes.
Ignacio,
Yes.
Alvin Smith,
Yes.
Hascheck,
Yes.
Jackman,
Yes.
Chair Judy.
Yes. Okay. That may take us to reports. Does that take us to
Yes.
Ratify action.
Oh, yes.
Oh, that's true. Okay, so we're going to recess this as the Policy Advisory Committee and reconvene as the Regional Transportation Planning Agency. Would someone like to make a motion to ratify the recommendations of the Policy Advisory Committee?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, can we have a roll call? Do we have any public comments on that? Not seeing any. Can we have a roll call?
Director Brown,
Yes.
Connie,
Yes.
Ignacio,
Yes.
Alvin Smith,
Yes.
Hascheck,
Yes.
and Chair Judy.
Yes. Okay, all right, at reports, we've got Caltrans list of projects, update and information.
Yeah, there should be some project notes as well as a couple of reports in the packet. We're trying to provide, I guess, an appropriate amount of information without overloading you with the details. So if you do have any questions, I can certainly attempt to track down the answers. But considering where we are in the meeting, I'll leave it brief.
Okay, do we have any questions for Rex? Director Connie?
Hi, Rex.
Hi.
Last round, I asked you about the Blosser Lane Highway 20 project in Willits. You said that you would get back to us with some information. Any word on that?
I think I did get an update, and I thought I passed it on, but I'm caught flat-footed right at the moment. I thought I found something on what was going on with that, but I may have dropped the ball and not actually passed it on. So thank you for the reminder. I'm going to make a note and see what I found, and this time get it to you. Apologies if I dropped the ball, so to speak.
Well, I gotta say, I appreciate the list of projects that are provided through the South Deal meetings, and I'm sure everybody appreciates getting that long list. There's quite a few Caltrans projects in Mendocino County and in Lake County as well.
Yeah, I'm going to try to continue to get that when it comes out and provide it, because I do find it also to be kind of a useful amount of information.
Director Connie, did you have anything else besides that? Okay, thanks. Any other board member questions or comments on Caltrans? Okay, then we're on to Mendocino Transit Authority.
I have no report, thank you.
Okay. North Coast Rail Authority.
Yeah, this is John Hascheck, and we haven't had a meeting lately. We went to, instead of monthly meetings, we're now at quarterly meetings. So I think the next one, it won't be for a couple more months. That's it.
Well, John, I just have a question. So there's the Great Redwood Trail. Is there a new board of directors for that organization, or will at some point the NCRA board transition into the Great Redwood Trail group?
Well, at some point in the near future, the NCRA board will be disbanded and a new board, the Great Redwood Trail, will be formed.
Okay, right. So that has not happened yet. Okay.
No.
All right. Okay. We have MCOG's staff summary of meetings. Are there any meetings you'd like to highlight?
Nothing to highlight, but happy to answer any questions.
I'm not seeing any questions. Okay, that brings us to MCOG administrative staff. We've got the April 15th Mendocino Express Corridor virtual ribbon cutting.
Yes, that's my item. This is pretty exciting. We're actually finishing a project here. It's one we thought would take 3 years. It's taken more like 5, but apparently they're now completed. So this nails down an important segment of our regional countywide zero emission vehicle readiness plan, and puts in the first public fast chargers on US 101. So we're really pleased with that. We had hoped to have a local ribbon cutting ceremony in Ukiah, but that's not to be, of course, with the coronavirus going on. So ChargePoint, with their grant, has decided to have this online virtual celebration for all of the 15 corridors they had grants for from the California Energy Commission, and we're one of those here in Mendocino County. So I'm going to have a couple minutes to talk on the program, and it's a good thing. You know, one thing, this particular event is for the ChargePoint part in all of this. There were some other grants made, and on our corridor through Mendocino County, there was another company called Recargo that had a grant. And so, as I've said in my written report here, between the two, we're getting DC electric vehicle fast chargers in Leggett to the north, Laytonville, Willits, Ukiah, and Hopland, and also down to Cloverdale and North Santa Rosa. So that's a big step forward. Any questions on that?
Yeah, why did they skip Fort Bragg?
This is, why did they skip Fort Bragg?
They didn't long enough.
Chose, there were different grant programs that they roll out. This was through the California Energy Commission, and they selected 15 corridors throughout the state. And I know US 101 is already a federally designated alternative fuels corridor, designated back in 2016, I believe. And so that was just a target area to get all the way from the Bay Area up through Del Norte County. So,
But then they get over here and they're stuck.
there are some other programs happening, other grant programs, and right now CalEVIP, that's the California Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Project, is the major grant funding program from the state. And so there are actually some funds reserved now for projects in Fort Bragg and up and down Route 1. That's through Sonoma Clean Power, and it's the Sonoma Coast Incentive Project. And we were in on kind of designing that project along with Mendocino County Air Quality, and decided that US 101 already got all these other grants. And so we were only going to give new incentives out to the other state highways in the county, you know, particularly Route 1, which didn't have anything really, and 128 through Anderson Valley, and Route 20, places like that. So it'll happen. It's
Yeah,
on
I
the way.
think they should
Yeah.
be targeting a lot of public buildings, you know, because there's a lot of, you know, like the hospitals and the city building, the county buildings, and all the buildings where a lot of public go. Not
Right.
not just you know, a big parking lot somewhere.
Yeah, the Highway 101 was a corridor project, and so those were meant to be fast chargers on the highway or within a mile or something, but adjacent to the highway. And the Cal EVIP project, which is rolling out all over the state, ours is already fully subscribed here in Sonoma and Mendocino. But that whole program is for really just about anyone. It's for residential, commercial, government, nonprofit, educational facilities, pretty much open to all of those. And so there have been a ton of applications. We know that they've reserved funds for those, and they're working their way through the process, but they haven't told us. We don't get to know exactly where those are going yet. So we'll find out as they get closer to installation.
Thanks,
Janet.
Janet.
Hopefully you get some of those in the places you want them.
I'm done picking on you. I'm just, I'm a member of too many climate groups right now, and they're all picking on me to push our agenda. Well, there's great interest right now, and that is the direction the state and the nation are going now, is to electrification. The Cal EVIP program is entirely dependent on who applies, because they've got to come up with some money too. It does give a large rebate, but it doesn't pay for the entire thing. So it all depends on who's applying for those and who's ready to dig, you know. So we'll see. But it's nice to get one done. So get out there and take a look. Ukiah has a station there now at Burger King over on East Perkins, just on the other side of the highway there. Laytonville, you might have seen that. It's up at Branscombe Road, right in the middle of town, and you can't miss it. And yeah, I haven't seen all of the sites yet. Hopland will be at Brutico Vineyard there, or winery, you know, the spot right downtown. And Leggett, they found a spot in the middle of town at the Farm and Garden store, I think it's called. And Willits will be at Safeway, I believe, too. So, and Cloverdale is at the the southern interchange there, where a lot of people stop for coffee. There's and gas and things like that. There's a shopping center there, and they'll be right there, right near where people tend to go when they're traveling. And Santa Rosa, I'm sorry, I've forgotten which of the two sites they settled on. I'll have to check that. But yeah, it's happening. We're finally getting something done. Thanks.
Yeah.
And if any of you are hearing from constituents who are curious about electric chargers for their home, Sonoma Clean Power essentially gives them away. You could get a car charger. They'll sell it at half price. Once you've established it's connected to the grid, you'll get your money back, your rebate. So your real cost is the cost of installing it, which you might pay an electrician if it's hardwired. There are plug-in models that will go into 220 volt. Okay, do we have a report from the California Transportation Foundation for March 16th?
I didn't write one up for you this time. It's something I always like to attend. I think several of us did. Loretta, you've also attended. I've got a couple of notes. I'll keep it brief. I did attend that. The speakers, a lot of them were state and federal officials, legislators. There were members of Biden's transition team. There was a panel on federal priorities. A lot of talk about the COVID relief bill. You heard about that earlier today on the agenda. And also the proposed infrastructure bill was a big topic. It turns out this transition team had a lot of input on that, on the initiatives for the infrastructure bill, things they're calling Build Back Better. Justice 40 is to have 40% funding go to these disinvested, they said, disadvantaged communities. We hear a lot about those. Equity is a big topic, and electrifying rail. These are some of the ideas that came out of the transition team that are making their way forward. There was talk about the differences between just a regular transportation reauthorization bill and this new infrastructure bill, which will be much more comprehensive, have things like broadband, the power grid, housing, things like that. Lots of discussion about climate, equity, big topic, freight and ports, safety, high-speed rail, the gas tax, where that's going. So that was federal. The Caltrans director, Tokes Omishakin, spoke. He said they released the Caltrans strategic plan in March, so that's out. There were the top 3 core principles were safety, climate action, and equity. Again, we're hearing a lot about that. And how they plan to meet the governor's executive orders for the zero emission vehicle goals. He mentioned that Senate Bill 1, which is that big funding state bill we had a couple years ago, has already in the past year generated $300 million in efficiency. So that was a good thing. There was, lastly, I'll say there's a panel on transit and economic recovery. One of the eminent panelists there, Therese McMillan, said nothing will be the same after COVID. And there was a lot of talk about what will happen next, and talked about translating the COVID impacts to changes in policy. Things will be different now, and they want to they talk about how to advance equity for the hardest hit by the pandemic. And on the equity front, just how to have meaningful public engagement, mainly really listening to those communities and involving those communities in co-creating the solutions. So that was a big thing. You know, we're just starting to hear now under the whole equity and environmental justice discussion about rural areas being part of that equity equation to be addressed. So that's kind of something new emerging I haven't heard much about before. But just my takeaways, climate action seems to be front and center this year. One thing I latched onto is the Cal STA, that's the overarching umbrella agency over all our transportation agencies, said their plan is going to remove the long-standing prohibition on EV charging at highway rest stops. So that was kind of good news for some of the things we've been trying to do. And yeah, and I just said the equity discussion is extending to rural areas. So they actually talked more about that at the CALCOG forum than at this one, but it seems to be an emerging topic. And that's all I have on that. Anybody else?
I'll just add to that. The last session was the very best session, and it was, early afternoon, so not well attended for some reason. It was really good. And what my takeaway from that one session was that the people who need public transportation the most are the most hard hit, the poorest people. They're talking about Chicago, for example. Who needs public transportation more than they do? And by having policies that only affect, cars and not public transportation, by defunding public transportation, you hit those communities even harder. So that was a really interesting point of view, and I hadn't really thought about it, and talk about equality. So if you want to stop people from being homeless and poor, you have to focus on changes in policy and giving up stuff, giving up cars, maybe, that sort of thing.
Yeah, reducing vehicle miles traveled, that's always a big thing they talk about.
Okay, all right. Do we have any miscellaneous reports from MCOG administrative staff? Director Hashek?
Thanks, Chair Judy. Well, I was just going to add to your question about the NCRA and the Great Redwood Trail, and that there's Senate Bill 69, which is the final piece of legislation that turns NCRA into the Great Redwood Trail Agency, heard by the Senate Transportation Committee on April 13th, so next Tuesday. And the bill will transfer the NCRA assets to SMART and the Great Redwood Trail Agency and dissolve NCRA once and for all. So that's coming up very quickly. And the Mendocino County Board of Supervisors wrote a letter of support, and you and I sponsored it.
End of one era, beginning of another.
Right.
So I have one miscellaneous report.
Okay.
Since I had to deliver some bad news today about the active transportation grant, I want to also share some good news. So several months ago when we talked about the Covelo State Route 162 multi-use trail project, we discussed a funding shortfall on that project, but at the March California Transportation Commission meeting, they approved a complete streets funding request for that project of about $2 million that adds to the active transportation funding on the project. So that was some great news. We're really, really grateful for that.
Covelo could use some good news about now.
Definitely, yes.
Okay, well, thanks for that. So our next meeting date is Monday, May 3rd, with a virtual tour of some Ukiah area projects, as well as our budget workshop. So I guess it's just sort of a reminder that it's an important meeting to attend, May 3rd. Are we going to meet earlier, or we'll get through everything starting at 1:30?
I think the plan is still to do our normal time because the tour is virtual. We don't have to build in time for actually traveling to and from the site, so we should be able to manage it within our normal meeting time frame.
All right, sounds good. Okay, then we're on to MCOG planning staff.
Good afternoon. I just have a brief report about the RTP and the ATP, the Regional Transportation Plan and the Active Transportation Plan update that we are currently working on. I believe we've reported periodically over the last few months, and the schedule is to adopt the update by February of 2022 per our 4-year cycle. However, we're actually hoping to bring it to the board for adoption in December. And we're currently working on the needs assessment, gathering information from the public. In lieu of the public workshop for this first round, we are utilizing a new, to us, a virtual public outreach tool, Social Pinpoint. We've tried it widely. There's a flyer in your in packet. We've posted it on social media. We've asked our partners to share it. And James tells me today that we've already gotten some pretty good feedback. We've received 16 comments on the map. It's got some interactive mapping tools, and along with a survey. And we've already received 20 survey responses, 8 budget responses on the budget tool. And as I mentioned, I think 16 comments on the map. So it sounds like the word's getting out there. I received some comments via email today from the public. So I think that's a positive sign. We just released it last week. And we're hoping that you all will take the survey as public members and share it however you can for us and just help get the word out. And in the meantime, we're continuing to work with the TAC and the tribes and Caltrans and other partners on the required update process, and we will be reporting to you periodically, if not monthly, on this. Be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Loretta, and thank you for looking for new ways to get public input.
Yes, thank you.
Not seeing any questions. I do want to note for the minutes that at about 3:50, Director Brown had to leave to go to a different meeting. Okay, do we have any miscellaneous reports on from MCOG planning staff?
Well, I will just mention that the local road safety plans project is in process. So we have a consultant, TJKM, that is working with staff from all 4 cities in the county to complete individual plans for each agency. I believe they've shared the website for that project with the local agencies and asked you to post it on your own website. So trying to attract public comment on that. So that project is going well. And I think that's the only thing I have to report. Thank you.
Thank you, Loretta.
Mhm.
Okay, not seeing any other comments, questions. Do we have any directors' reports or comments? Okay, not seeing any. CALCOG, I don't know if there's anything to report there from the March forum.
Well, there was already reported mostly it was about the big leadership meeting that they had.
Okay, all right, well, thanks. Thanks, Tess. Well, then that brings us to adjournment at 3:56.
All right,
Thanks.
thank you, everyone.
Thank you.